It's a good bounce back win for us today. I thought we started the game with the right tone on the defensive end. And so that was
Everyone thought the chaos finally ended the moment Team USA stood on the podium in Paris, gold medals around their necks and cameras flashing. On the surface, it looked like another clean victory, another chapter closed. But behind the smiles and scripted celebrations, something was already unraveling. Because the win didn't silence the outrage, it magnified it. What most fans didn't realize at the time was that this gold medal run came with a cost. Not just bad press, not just angry comment sections, but consequences that would surface weeks later, when the headlines suddenly shifted away from trophies and toward exits. Quiet ones, permanent ones. And at the center of it all was a decision that sparked one of the most explosive debates in women's sports history. A roster choice that left Caitlin Clark watching from home and placed Cheryl Reeve directly in the line of fire. What looked like a coaching call may have turned into a career-ending mistake, and the fallout was only just beginning. The moment the official roster dropped, everything changed. Fans scanned the list slowly at first, assuming the obvious name would be there. Then they scanned it again and again, because one absence was impossible to ignore. Caitlin Clark wasn't on it. No announcement, no build-up, just a quiet omission that hit like a punch to the chest. This wasn't a routine snub. Clark wasn't just another talented player having a good year. She was shattering viewership records, dragging sold-out crowds into arenas that hadn't seen that kind of buzz in years, and pulling millions of new eyes into women's basketball almost overnight. Entire TV schedules were being reshuffled around her games. Jerseys were selling faster than teams could print them. And suddenly, the most visible athlete in the sport was being told she wasn't ready for the biggest stage in the world. The reaction was instant and volcanic. Social media exploded with disbelief, then anger, then full-blown accusations. Fans didn't frame this as a basketball decision, they framed it as a statement. To them, it felt intentional, like a warning shot from the establishment saying fame doesn't matter, popularity doesn't matter, and paying your dues still comes first. The phrase gatekeeping started trending, and once it took hold, it never let go. What made it worse was the timing. Clark had already proven she could handle pressure, physicality, and expectations that crushed most rookies. Yet the explanation floated to the public was vague and unsatisfying. Experience, fit, defense. None of it landed, because if those standards applied evenly, fans believed the list would have looked very different. As outrage grew, attention shifted from the roster itself to who might be responsible. Selection committee members stayed quiet, executives avoided specifics, and slowly one figure became the lightning rod for the entire storm, the head coach. Whether fair or not, the public decided this wasn't just a system failure, it was personal. And once that narrative took root, there was no turning back. Once the shock faded, curiosity took over. Fans didn't just argue, they started digging. Old clips resurfaced, screenshots were pulled, social posts that once seemed harmless were suddenly re-examined under a microscope. And that's when the conversation quietly shifted from basketball logic to perceived intent. Comments from Cheryl Reeve that had flown under the radar before were now being read in a completely different tone. Media hype comments, statements urging coverage of the entire league instead of one player. On paper, they sounded reasonable, but in the middle of the Caitlin Clark explosion, fans heard something else entirely. To them, it didn't sound like balance, it sounded like frustration. One preseason moment in particular became a flashpoint. After a game that drew massive attention, Reeve posted a message that many interpreted as downplaying Clark's impact, suggesting interest came from elsewhere. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. In an atmosphere already charged with suspicion, that small comment poured gasoline on the fire. Screenshots spread, threads exploded, and suddenly a narrative began to harden. The idea circulating online wasn't that Clark wasn't talented. No one believed that. The claim floating around was that the old guard felt threatened. Rumors suggested this wasn't about readiness or defense, but about control, about reminding a rookie that hype doesn't outrank hierarchy. None of this was ever confirmed, but once fans started connecting dots, perception overtook reality. Every press moment after that only deepened the divide. When questions about Clark were brushed aside or met with visible annoyance, viewers didn't see professionalism, they saw resentment. Each eye roll, each deflection, each attempt to redirect attention convinced the internet that something personal was simmering beneath the surface. By this point, it no longer mattered what was true. The damage was already done. The story had evolved into an us versus them battle. On one side stood a rapidly growing fan base demanding access to the most exciting player in the sport. On the other stood an establishment that appeared determined to resist the shift. And right in the middle of it all stood Cheryl Reeve, whether she wanted the role or not.
Once emotions cooled, the conversation took a colder, sharper turn. Numbers don't care about legacy, they don't care about tradition, and they definitely don't care about pride. As the season rolled on, the data started telling a story that was impossible to ignore. Everywhere Caitlin Clark played, viewership spiked. Road games turned into sellouts. Random weeknight broadcasts outperformed expectations. Entire networks quietly reorganized their programming to ride the momentum. At the same time, the biggest stage in sports was approaching, the Olympics. The one moment where casual fans, international audiences, and lapsed viewers all tune in at once. Insiders have since claimed that broadcasters were counting on the Clark phenomenon to carry women's basketball into a new global tier. Highlight packages, viral deep threes, a crossover star introduced to the world in real time. That was the vision being floated behind closed doors. But when the Olympic numbers finally came in, the gap was obvious. The gold medal game performed fine, respectable even, but fine wasn't the expectation. Analysts pointed out that viewership sat well below what it could have been if the sport's most recognizable face had been on the floor. Online, the phrase started circulating. They won gold, but lost the moment. The backlash wasn't just coming from fans anymore. Reports suggested executives and marketing partners were frustrated, not angry, disappointed, because this wasn't just a missed game plan, it was a missed business opportunity. Merchandise, international media deals, social growth, all of it left unrealized. The gamble was clear: basketball purity over popularity. That choice sent a message, intentional or not. It said tradition mattered more than audience demand. And in modern sports, that's a dangerous stance. Because when money enters the conversation, medals stop being the only metric that matters. And that's when the pressure truly started to build, not from the crowd, but from the people watching the balance sheets. The official justification always sounded clean on the surface. Clark lacked international experience, she wasn't physical enough. The roster needed balance, not hype. For a while, those explanations held, at least until the games actually started. Because once Team USA stepped onto the floor, the theory was put to the test in real time. Against weaker opponents, the cracks were easy to ignore. Blowout wins covered a lot of flaws. But when the competition tightened, the problems became obvious. Possession stalled, ball movement slowed. The offense leaned heavily on isolation instead of flow. There were stretches where Team USA looked uncomfortable creating easy looks, relying instead on tough shots late in the clock. And every time that happened, the same thought flooded timelines almost simultaneously. You know who fixes this. Fans didn't need long breakdowns to see it. The team struggled most in the exact areas where Caitlin Clark had already built her reputation: spacing, vision, and shot creation for others. As turnovers piled up or possessions died on the perimeter, social media lit up. Clips were slowed down, screenshots were posted, comment sections turned ruthless. The player who wasn't there became louder than the ones who were. The close game against France took everything to another level. On paper, it shouldn't have been competitive, but it was, painfully so. The offense grew tight, predictable, and tense. Every empty possession felt heavier than the last. When the final buzzer sounded and Team USA escaped by a single point, relief washed over the bench. But the criticism had already begun. That game changed the tone of the debate. It was no longer hypothetical, no longer emotional. Fans argued that this wasn't about disrespect or favoritism anymore. It was about fit, about solving problems that were clearly happening on the court. Watching a generational playmaker sit at home while the team fought through offensive drought became the visual proof many people were waiting for. Team USA still won, they still advanced, but dominance had turned into survival. And in the eyes of the public, that made the original decision look less like discipline and more like a miscalculation. The medal was real, but so was the doubt. By the time the questions started coming daily, there was no escaping it. Every press conference circled back to the same subject. Not schemes, not rotations, not even the gold medal chase. It was always about the omission and whether ego played a role. And sitting in front of the microphones, Cheryl Reeve looked like someone carrying the full weight of an organization on her shoulders.
She pushed back hard, dismissed reports as fiction, brushed off speculation as noise. At one point, she framed herself as the one taking bullets so others wouldn't have to. To some, that sounded loyal. To others, it came off as defensive. The tone mattered, because by then, the room was no longer neutral. Every answer was dissected. Every pause became a clip. Every sigh turned into evidence. Instead of cooling the situation, the strategy did the opposite. By stepping into the role of protector, she unintentionally made herself the face of the decision. Fans stopped separating the coach from the committee. In their minds, they merged into one. And once that happened, there was no buffer left. Every criticism landed directly on her desk. You could feel the exhaustion set in. What should have been a victory lap began to feel like a daily interrogation. Wins didn't end debates. Medals didn't quiet critics. The gold no longer felt like a shield. It felt like a reminder that even success wasn't enough to move the conversation forward. The story had outgrown the result. As the Olympics progressed, the tension followed her everywhere. Interviews became shorter. Answers became sharper. The atmosphere around the program turned toxic, and the celebration most coaches dream of was nowhere to be found. This wasn't just pressure anymore, it was burnout, playing out in real time under a spotlight that refused to dim. And while the fans were loud, they weren't the only ones paying attention. Because when a job stops being about coaching and starts being about damage control, leadership notices. And behind the scenes, patience was wearing thin. By this point, every appearance in front of a microphone felt like walking into an ambush. No matter the question, no matter the context, the conversation always drifted back to the same place. Why wasn't Caitlin Clark there? And was this ever really about basketball? Sitting at the podium, Cheryl Reeve wasn't defending game plans anymore. She was defending credibility. She leaned into firmness, shutting down rumors and calling reports about personal bias fiction. At times, she made it clear she believed the narrative had spiraled beyond reality, but firmness in an already heated environment didn't come across as confidence. To many watching, it felt like irritation. The more she pushed back, the more determined critics became to read between the lines. When she said she was taking bullets for the organization, it was meant to project loyalty. Instead, it reframed the story in a way that worked against her. The public didn't see a coach protecting her staff. They saw someone acknowledging just how intense the backlash had become. That single phrase followed her through headlines, reaction videos, and endless social clips. It quietly cemented her role as the symbol of the snub. Each interview made it worse. Shorter answers replaced longer explanations. Frustration seeped into her tone. The gold medal run, which should have been filled with celebration and praise, felt overshadowed by a cloud that refused to lift. Wins didn't end the discourse. Success didn't change minds. Instead, every game simply reset the cycle of questions. That's when burnout became impossible to ignore. Coaching is already relentless, but this was different. This wasn't strategy pressure, this was cultural pressure. Reeve wasn't just being questioned by reporters anymore. She was being analyzed by fans, commentators, influencers, and viral accounts who replayed every word at half speed. The job stopped being about basketball and became a full-time crisis response. Behind the scenes, the noise was becoming a liability. The program felt heavy. The story had grown bigger than the medal chase, bigger than the team itself. And when a coach becomes the distraction, no amount of winning can undo that reality. By the time the Olympics neared their end, it was clear something had shifted. The seat wasn't just warm anymore, it was burning. While fans argued loudly online, a much quieter frustration was building in the background. This time, it wasn't coming from comment sections or talk shows. It was coming from people who think in numbers, not narratives. Agents, sponsors, and marketing executives were all watching the same thing unfold, and privately, many believed a once-in-a-generation opportunity had slipped away. The Olympics aren't just a tournament, they're a global launch pad. One run, one moment, one breakout star can change the financial trajectory of an entire sport. And according to industry whispers, that was the expectation surrounding Caitlin Clark. International audiences discovering her in real time, viral clips crossing language barriers, jerseys moving overseas, new sponsorship pipelines opening almost overnight. Instead, that moment never came. There were no logo threes lighting up Paris, no viral assist compilations flooding global feeds. The spotlight that should have introduced a new face of women's basketball to the world stayed dim. Insiders have since claimed the frustration wasn't emotional, it was practical. This wasn't about favoritism, it was about scale.
The feedback behind closed doors was brutal in its simplicity. You don't get many Olympic cycles. You don't get many stars who arrive with built-in attention. And when those two things overlap, you don't hesitate. From a business perspective, the decision looked increasingly difficult to defend. Not wrong, just costly. That's when the tone inside the industry shifted. The gold medal still mattered, but it no longer felt sufficient. Sponsors don't buy tradition. Networks don't monetize philosophy. They monetize moments. And the sense among insiders was that the program had confused stability with safety, choosing comfort over growth. In professional sports, missed revenue is often more damaging than missed shots. And once that reality sets in, accountability follows quickly. The whispers grew louder, the patience thinner. Because while fans can argue forever, money makes decisions fast. And the clock was already ticking toward the next Olympic cycle. When the Olympics ended, something felt off. Usually, a gold medal run comes with a victory tour, talk show spots, glowing profiles, endless praise about legacy and dominance. This time, there was mostly silence. The celebration felt muted, almost avoided, as if everyone understood that the story surrounding Team USA hadn't been resolved by winning. Then the news quietly surfaced. Cheryl Reeve wouldn't be returning. The explanation was careful and polished. Her contract had run its course, she had given enough time, it was the right moment to step away. On paper, it sounded voluntary, but for many observers, the timing said far more than the words ever could. USA basketball wasn't just closing a chapter, it was clearing the board. The next Olympics would take place in Los Angeles, on home soil, in front of a domestic audience primed for a spectacle. And by then, there would be no avoiding it. Caitlin Clark would be the face of that team. Designing the future around her while keeping the coach who left her off the biggest roster in the world would have been a public relations disaster waiting to happen. This exit looked less like a resignation and more like a reset. Remove the friction, remove the controversy, remove the character fans had cast as the antagonist in the story. By moving on now, leadership created breathing room, time to reframe the narrative before 2028 ever arrived. There was also the reality of basketball philosophy.
Reeve's identity was built on structure, defense, and grinded-out execution. It had worked for years, it had won championships, but the game was changing fast. The next era of women's basketball was leaning toward pace, spacing, and range. Building around Clark meant embracing that shift fully, not fighting it. So the decision landed with quiet finality. No press tour, no dramatic send-off, just a clean separation that signaled adaptation. USA Basketball wasn't admitting fault outright, but it was acknowledging something just as powerful. The future demands flexibility. And holding on to the past, even a successful one, can become the most expensive mistake of all. In the end, this was never just about one roster spot or one coach. It was about who actually holds power in modern sports. For decades, decisions flowed one way, from the top down. Fans watched, players played, executives decided. But this saga made something impossible to deny. The audience isn't silent anymore, and it isn't powerless. The rise of Caitlin Clark exposed a fault line that had been building for years. She wasn't just a high-scoring rookie, she was a movement, a magnet for attention, money, and growth. Trying to treat her like a normal piece inside an old system ignored a reality the modern sports world can't escape. Superstars don't just win games, they shape industries. For all her success, Cheryl Reeve became the symbol of resistance to that shift. Fair or not, perception hardened. The gold medal couldn't erase it. And in today's climate, perception moves faster than facts. Once fans decided the future was being blocked, the outcome became inevitable. This moment marks a clear changing of the guard. The sport is no longer driven solely by tradition, titles, or internal hierarchies. It's driven by connection, by visibility, by who brings people into the arena and keeps them there. The lesson is harsh but simple. You can win without the future, but you can't fight it forever. As the next Olympic cycle approaches, the path forward is obvious. The game will be built around the players who move culture, not resist it. And any leader who refuses to adapt will face the same reality. Because in the modern era, talent fills trophy cases, but stars build empires.